All right, I guess we can get started. So welcome everyone to this Ask an Expert session. And the topic of the discussion is opportunities, safety, and ethics in generative AI. And we have with us three expert panelists with us, Ashleigh Golden, Derrick Hull, and Nikiforova. And first I'm going to introduce them, and then the audience will have the the opportunity to ask questions to the panelists. Ashleigh Golden is a VP of Psychology at Wayhaven and AI mental health well-being coach for college students and adjunct clinical assistant professor at Stanford University School of Medicine, Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. She has held behavioral health leadership roles at Wobot Health, Lark Health, Brightside Health, and Google. Dr. Golden is a founding member of Therapists in Tech and Well for Digital Health. She has been recognized as a Forbes Healthcare Innovator, Digital Health Canada Emerging Health Leader, and LinkedIn Top Product Voice. Dr. Golden serves on the American Psychological Association's inaugural Mental Health Technology Advisory Committee, where she co-leads the Ethics Subcommittee and co-chairs the Association for Behavioral and Cognitive Therapies Technology Committee's AI Subcommittee. She also serves on the Society for Digital Mental Health Industry Special Interest Group. She's currently pursuing a postdoctoral master's degree in clinical psychopharmacology to augment her biopsychosocial approach to executive product leadership. Welcome, Ashleigh. Next, we have Derrick Hull. Derrick Hull leads clinical R&D at Slingshot AI, where he is helping develop first psychology foundation model designed to support safe, effective, and ethically grounded therapeutic reasoning in AI systems. His work focuses on aligning large language models with clinical standards of care to ensure they respond to users with psychological insight, emotional nuance, and risk-sensitive behavior. And Dr. Hull has previously held roles at Talkspace and Noom, directing the design and evaluation of digital mental health interventions at scale. His research has been supported by NIH R1 funding and has been published in Nature, PNAS, and Behavioral and Brain Sciences, and has been featured in Time, the New York Times, and Wall Street Journal. Dr. Hull has earned his PhD in clinical psychology from Columbia University. Welcome. And finally, we have Nikiforova. K's work focuses on intersection of technology and health with a decade's tenure in the digital health space. They advise startups and nonprofits and ideate on and build new technology that increases access to care. Most recently, as the head of clinical and research at Violet, Kay developed a cultural competence benchmarking system, conducted innovative clinical outcomes research, and created data models to identify quality care and health disparities. They're completing their clinical psych PhD, hold a position as Federal Mental Health Policy Fellow at the National Council for Mental Wellbeing, and currently serve as an inaugural member of the newly formed American Psychological Association Mental Health Tech Advisory Committee. And they regularly speak publicly on health, technology, and equity-related topics at universities, through the press, and at the top health tech conferences. And Kay is passionate about leveraging technology and advocacy to create a more equitable healthcare system. Welcome, Kay. Okay, so that was all, a mouthful. But if I have missed something, I would invite the panelists to add it and share their conflicts of interests and their connection to the topic of our discussion today. Ashleigh, if you want to go first.
I think you covered it in terms of conflicts of interest. VP of Psychology at Wayhaven, and then advise a couple early stage Gen AI mental health or mental wellness startups.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody else, if Derrick or Kay, if you have anything else to add or share?
I might say a word or two, Arka. Thank you. So you mentioned Slingshot, and I'm certainly conflicted there. And then you mentioned earlier, and I don't know if Ash and Kay would want to speak to this as well. I certainly would be interested to hear a little bit about more of their history of working with AI in this space. The one thing that I'll share that is that when I was at Talkspace, we worked on building, I wouldn't call it AI, but a kind of assistant for the therapists in 2016, using like Distilbert. That was the cutting edge back then. And part of the reason I mention that as context for what we'll be talking about tonight is that the difference in the technology, this won't surprise anybody in the room, but I just think it's nice to remind ourselves every now and then how much the technology has advanced just in the last year, let alone the last, 8 to 9 years. It's profoundly exciting, a little frightening, how fast it's moving. So we'll be excited to see how the conversation goes tonight.
Okay, great. Kay, if you don't have anything to add, I'll just open it up to the audience. Okay. So the structure of this is more informal and interactive. So I would just encourage the audience members to just jump in and ask questions. Anybody? Okay. Well, if not, then I can get us started with a So one of the questions that I have had is like, should Gen AI tools be held to the same clinical standards, ethical standards that we do individual providers? And it's, open to all panelists, whoever would want to take it.
I can start. I mean, I think what comes to mind is they should absolutely be held to appropriate, ethical, responsible standards, not necessarily identical ones. A Gen AI tool isn't a person, but it can still drastically shape someone's thoughts, decisions, well-being. And so I think the ethical bar needs to reflect that influence. And I think we're starting to see that reflected in a proliferation of Gen AI or mental health AI frameworks for evaluation around both development and deployment, like the FITA framework in Betsy States and CO's READY framework. So I'll start with that.
Thank you.
I appreciate one of the things that Ash mentioned, highlighted, is that it depends what we mean by standards, I suppose, right? Like there are standards that we certainly want to hold AI to. There are standards we probably can't hold AI to. I mean, my view is that on certain kinds of standards, particularly around, I think safety is the one that I'm especially interested in. We should almost hold it to a higher standard. Like if you imagine having a human therapist that was assisting, I don't know, 20,000, 30,000 people, you would want to put a lot of attention on that therapist, a lot of support, a lot of training, a lot of encouragement probably. And I imagine that AI would benefit from the same. And then the other question that comes, or the other thought that comes to mind too, is around expectations. And I think when it comes to expectations, AI will certainly be held to a higher standard, whether it should or shouldn't. I mean, you can look for an analogy in self-driving cars. We expect self-driving cars to be perfect. And if they're not, that concerns us, rightly, but certainly human drivers are also far from perfect. And that's not unusual for any new technology. We tend to hold it to a higher standard than the status quo. Whether we should or shouldn't is maybe a philosophical debate, but I certainly think that we will see that as these systems roll out.
Thanks.
I can jump in specifically focusing on companies who are putting out these products. One of the things that I think about is whether we hold a Gen AI product to an ethical standard may or may not reflect consequences for the company itself in getting those things wrong and not adhering to those standards. And so while I think frameworks are very helpful and a step in the right direction, I do think that there need to be additional guardrails available for companies, or not even available guardrails that are imposed on companies to make sure that they're following through, because the clinician as an individual can have repercussions, whether it's licensure, et cetera. And so I'd like to understand to what extent we're going to be able to do the same for companies.
Thank you. I would have like a lot of follow-up questions, but we have audience questions, so I'll take up those. So the first question that I had was for a PhD student who's interested in incorporating generative AI into intervention work, but have minimal experience with AI. Can you share suggestions on how or where exactly to start, especially to select the appropriate tool, ensure that generative AI is serving my needs, and know where its suggestions are coming from, not black box? Let me know if you want to.
Jacob. Hey, Jacob. Excuse me.
Okay. Let me know if you want me to repeat the question or parts of it.
Oh yeah, can you do it one more time? Was it they're developing, or they're wanting to know how to incorporate it into their practice, or
Right,
they're
where,
developing? Oh, okay.
Yeah. How to incorporate generative AI, where to get started, and wants to have some like wants to know the reasoning behind AI's responses, and doesn't want just to be a black box. So where would they even get started?
I can offer some suggestions. I would think that it depends on what you mean incorporated into your practice, I guess, and how you want to use it. Because I think there are some places where the technologies may be a little further down the road than others. I mean, certainly some things you want to keep in mind are what control do or do you not have over the data that's being put into the system? What control does your patient or client have over the data that's being put into the system? How aware are they of the ways in which you're using it? Are they comfortable with the ways that you're using it? I think a third piece too around selection of technology is, I admit for me, I love the base models. ChatGPT is great for some things, Claude, Grok, whatever, go down your list. But I admit personally, they don't feel ready for clinical prime time to me. I think you're going to want to find some kind of specialized tool that has the right kinds of training data in it. I mean, one thing that I like to beat the drum on, maybe too much, is that when it comes to mental health, models can be very limited by the data that they're trained on. Most models have virtually no mental health training at all, unless you want to count Reddit or something as mental health data, which I don't know. I've been on Reddit lately and I'm not sure. So I think, you'll want to be cognizant of how companies are training these models, and do they have the right kind of data to support the behavior that you would want the model to execute on, are a short list of questions that I would be thinking about.
I also I consider it more from this sort of like humanistic existential perspective of, if use it, use it and see what it elicits in you. Because I think oftentimes, especially some of the, emotional quote unquote connections that people can or cannot develop with these technologies, I think it's really good to understand, using a service like this or a product like this, what would it bring up in you yourself? How do you experience the responses that it's giving you? What do you want to give it back? And so having that firsthand, I think with the eventual technology that you end up using, or even, some of the more base models, I think would be particularly useful to understand how patients connect.
Thank you.
And I think I really appreciated what Derrick said about how you're keen to use it. Is it more like an administrative assistant? Is it more like kind of like a junior colleague collaborator, where it's summarizing visits and offering you insights? Is it more like a user-facing app that you're integrating into care or treatment? But whatever you're doing, I'd encourage you to continue to think of yourself as being in the driver's seat, and this being, or kind of complementing your own case conceptualization or formulation, and that's collaborative with the patient, and your treatment plan, and your problem solving. And yeah, I'd also encourage you to, I think, to kind of get behind the black box, and in ChatGPT, you know, you can make your own GPTs, et cetera, get a feel for what that's like to do, how these things get created, experiment with prompt engineering, and also get involved if you have the bandwidth at the systemic level, like SDMH's industry SIG, or other organizations, so that you're staying abreast of developments in ways that could really affect your patients or clients.
Thank you. We have another question from Novia. Novia, would you like to unmute yourself and ask, or do you want me to ask?
Yeah, I can ask. I just didn't want to forget my question. So Gen AI is so new, and at this point, as far as I know, there aren't a lot of regulations, and unfortunately, that means minors and teenagers can easily access these kind of tools, or tools with Gen AI involved, but maybe not disclose them. And as we know, for children especially, it's hard for them to tell apart what's accurate, what's trustworthy, what's credible, and they might not even have that skills to do it. So I was curious in terms of what your thoughts are on what kinds of regulations or maybe even tools that we should develop to help children build a skill, or to help them avoid falling into this trap of everything is rainbow and sunshine and you should trust it no matter what. That's the question. A little long, but it's also in the chat.
We're all tarnish our conversation here. I love the question. I think it's very concerning. You know, I mean, the other case that comes to mind for me are things around social media. Now AI exists in a kind of funny place where on one hand, we sort of treat it like it's media because it's, you know, quote unquote, just giving information. And historically, we've tended not to regulate media very much. We sort of make it a burden on the parents or other individuals to kind of educate themselves. My guess / hope is that AI will move in a slightly different direction, that there will be more regulations that come out. In fact, we're already starting to see some. The state of Illinois, as an example, has passed regulation recently about what you can and can't say about chatbots that are delivering mental health care. So we may see more of that. We may see less of that. It may change. Who knows? I mean, these days are very, very early. But I love the idea of media training. I would extend it just a little bit and say that I think even for adults, it's not clear, right? We know that there's lots of hallucinations around citations that'll make up scientific work. We know from the work of Jamie Pennybaker and some others that published a paper that ChatGPT actually gives pretty bad psychology advice that tells you pretty much the opposite of what you should be doing when it comes to handling stress, the stress of school in particular, and some other things. So again, this will be one more beat on the drum, and I'll try not to say it again. But you know, the data that these models are trained on it's just the internet. So whatever, not just the internet, but mostly the internet and maybe some other things that, you know, Google has amassed over time, publications and so on. But a lot of it is the internet, certainly when it comes to psychological advice. And we know it's not great, and we know it's not evidence-based. And there are certainly things to worry about there for both kids and for parents. Never mind the ways in which mental health is typically regulated when it comes to working with minors. And that's done state by state. The age at which minors can, you know, engage in a therapeutic process without having information passed to their parents varies widely from state. Every state regulates that quite differently. So if we have in mind any kind of generative AI providing an intervention or being part of a licensed healthcare context, thinking through how to apply those regulations is already tricky. Never mind that a minor could show up and say, yeah, I'm an adult, just, you know, tell me whatever I want to know. Now, there are some solutions to that. I don't know how familiar people are with, oh, I know it's called KWS, and I have to remember what the letters stand for. Kids Web Service or something. But video game companies use this to verify the age of kids and then also to ensure that a parent's in the loop. And so we could imagine some services like that that have been designed to solve problems in other areas like video games and social media may be leverageable on the AI side as well. Something I would certainly encourage at least.
Something I think a lot about also is, I mean, I work on a product for college students, but they could be considered youth. And one of the things that I think about is this balance between anthropomorphism, which we know that people will, well, it's a chatbot that we work on, but we know that people will project a personality onto a chatbot, even if it doesn't necessarily have one or isn't intended to have one. We know from user research and the literature that that's, you're designing for anthropomorphism is one of the things that can bolster uptake and engagement. And so I think a dialectic that we walk, especially when thinking about vulnerable populations like youth, is designing with anthropomorphism in mind, like characters who may represent the lived experiences and intersecting identities of youth, but who are also very transparent and upfront about being AIs. So it's kind of like this experience of suspension of disbelief, but a periodic or a continual reminding that this isn't a human, and a reminder about its limitation or limitations and when a human is needed. I also do wonder about bolstering kind of just broader digital literacy efforts in some sort of formal way integrated into the education system for youth in particular, and at the pace at which, or close to the pace at which Gen AI mental health is evolving. How to spot when something is off, even if it sounds helpful.
Yeah, and on my end, very much resonate with the media literacy and digital literacy, and now especially AI literacy. I think specifically for youth, but again, we'll echo for adults, or quite frankly, at this point, anybody using these tools, understanding how we get from training data, where training data comes from, right? Oftentimes scrubbed from the internet, especially for more generalized models, and how it eventually becomes a response. This actually came from something that I was looking at this morning. I think it's really helpful to have tangible examples of how wrong information, misinformation, wrong sources of data can become truths. I think this was earlier today, an author from a satire newspaper in Canada had posted a satire article talking about how this one particular island had a 12-minute time zone difference from the mainland. It had its own, time zone as a joke, and in 2024. And, when she went in and checked and to see if both I think like Meta and Google, if they would respond with, does this island actually have this specific time zone? Like they both said, yes, there's a 12-minute difference between the mainland, which is obviously nonsensical, but because it was pulling from the satire newspaper, it brought these things out. Additionally, one of my favorite examples is, the vegetative electron microscopy, where because they were using training data of paragraphs that were, I think, columned, it started combining words together and then basically started outputting these nonsense words. So I think having tangible examples of how things that don't make sense can arise will allow youth and also adults to more critically engage when something doesn't quite feel right, or be able to spot things that can be misinformation or incorrect.
And I guess, yeah, very well said.
Go ahead, go
Now
ahead.
I'm trying to remember now what province they were talking about. I should know this as a Canadian.
I'll send you the article.
Thank you. But I guess one of the other things that I think about is as we continue to refine and iterate on Gen AI mental health models, continuing to use some rules-based systems underneath, especially with vulnerable at-risk populations like youth. So layering in guardrails and decision trees to handle sensitive content. So, I mean, they're non-deterministic systems, right? So, so Gen AI never really has full creative control in really high stakes moments. And yeah, I think that at least right now, that might be one of the more promising ways to scale safety without sacrificing emotional resonance and personalization.
Well, thanks for the thoughtful answers. Kaylin has a question. Kaylin Rutherford, would you like
Yeah.
to come on? Yeah.
Yeah, thank
Go ahead.
you. Yeah, I think just this question, starting with Derrick, but I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts around control over data. I'm really curious if you believe there should be ethical and transparent standards set for data collection and use, particularly at private companies like Slingshot. And if you think they should be industry-wide, what do you propose they should be at this stage?
That's a great question, Kaylin. Thank you. Boy, there's so many ways to think about this. I think here's where I think the industry should be today, and then I'll try to give some thoughts about where I think the industry should go, because as it stands right now, you know, many people are training these models, particularly if they're thinking about a clinical context, with best intentions in mind. And so, for example, at Slingshot, you know, we only incorporate your data into the training set if you opt in. We instruct you about what it means to opt in, which data is included, which is not. Complete transparency, unfortunately, requires a lot of writing. So I think many companies try to be as transparent as they can be in the terms of service. The downside is that terms of service are often hard to read. And so I do feel like companies that are trying to, this kind of goes back to the media literacy, media training piece, where the companies can be a part of that solution, I think, and trying to help people understand what's happening with their data when they're interacting with a system like this. Now, the public systems work with so many folks that I don't know that anybody really pays attention there. But I think the more specialized systems, like the one that we're trying to build at Slingshot, we try to take some added steps to instruct the consumer. I think one thing that concerns me, and it's something we're working on at Slingshot, I wish I had a concrete update. Give us, you know, we'll probably need 6 months or so. It's something that we're thinking about right now and talking to legal about, is there isn't a great legal solution for what happens when a startup with great intentions that really tries to protect its data is then acquired by a larger organization. Then what? Now where does the data go? And now all the people that you've learned to trust over the years, that, you know, whose faces are on the website, they're now gone, or maybe they now, you know, report to some other corporate structure. And once they own a company, they sort of own the data and they can do whatever they want with it. But there are starting to be some legal structures that allow companies to stipulate what the data can and cannot be used for in the future, even after acquisition by another target. So my hope is that we'll start to get some more rigorous structures around that so that people can trust what's going to happen with their data over the long term. I think particularly because you know, if you think about a model that's designed to deliver interventions directly or to be part of any kind of healthcare process, that data is sensitive for 1,000 good reasons. We could have a debate around whether it's more sensitive than what you're putting into ChatGPT. I mean, ChatGPT certainly can learn a lot about you as well and build a model on you, depending on how much you use it and what you use it for. But I think when it comes to particularly vulnerable populations that are looking for service and support, some additional protections are needed. And those legal structures, as I said, are just starting to be developed. My hope is that they will continue to be.
I think, yeah, in terms of, this isn't necessarily regulatory or legal or nationally adopted, but I think we do already have some suggestions or recommendations for at least best practices for ethical standards around privacy, like in the READY framework, like in the FITA framework, right? Like, I think in the READY framework, it's like, you know, limited use of health info, transparent, accessible information on how it's used, being able to opt out of health information collection or sharing, etc. And in FITA, advanced data protection measures, and then user autonomy around being able to access, amend, or delete personal info. So I think those already exist and may only proliferate. I think the second piece to that is also knowing that I think the average American reads at around a grade 4 to 8-ish level, making sure that those really complex privacy policies are translated up front, maybe in onboarding, into a clear, succinct, plain, comprehensible language that's really readable, user-friendly, etc. And maybe there's even a check or a confirmation of understanding to see if folks got it. So they have the option of reading the broader terms and conditions and privacy policy, but they also have this very user-friendly distillation available to them up front.
We have a couple of questions from Kanza Faisal. Would you like to come on?
Hi, I'm traveling, so I was hoping you could read them, but I'll do them if it's not too noisy.
It's
Just
fine,
wanted to know that, okay, that's great. So, like my experience with conversational agents, the chatbots, is that users, they just use it. They probably do not know how to get the best out of it, how to ask the right kind of questions to get to a point where they can actually get great results out of it, meaningful results out of it. So how do you really keep the users to stay involved with your product or stay involved with the chatbot? Because I feel like now people just use it when they need it, really.
I think that may also depend on your I think you're talking about engagement, maybe sustained engagement.
That's right.
If I'm catching you right. Okay. And what I wonder is, I think there are different models of engagement, right? Some products may be going for a more, what would you say, long-term journey that may involve sequential modules that build on one another in order to benefit from key active ingredients or mechanisms. And in that case, you're wanting to promote long-term sustained engagement, but some may be deliberately built for a more in the moment, relief of negative emotions or induction of positive emotions, or collaboratively problem solving daily life challenges, kind of single session at a time approach translated into a digital context. So I think it does depend on the model on which you built your product. I'll just start there.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with Ash's, question or thoughts around what the use case is. I think it's absolutely true. There could be lots of different kinds of use cases. From a philosophical perspective, if I just step back from it, because I guess there's two ways to think about this. One is what are the psychological principles that would inform how to assist in engagement here? And as we know, digital mental health interventions generally tend to suffer from an engagement problem, especially if you don't have a human in the loop. The so-called self-guided sort of interventions generally have worse engagement, retention, and outcomes than interventions that have a human in the loop. Now, whether AI can be conversational enough to solve that kind of problem is actually an open question right now that folks in the field are trying to figure out. So there's a question of, can it solve the problem? There's an additional question, and I won't have a deep answer to this, but I think it's an interesting philosophical one, is should it solve that problem? I admit, as a therapist myself, I'm a little nervous at the idea that every time somebody has an uncomfortable feeling or needs help in some way, they open their phone and go to an app. I mean, at some point, we want to start building distress tolerance and, all the things that we want to see for long-term outcomes. Are so important. And so how will the generative AI agent respond in those cases? Will it distract you and give you other things to think about? Sure, let's talk about what's the sports game you saw lately? What are your favorite, what are your favorite video games? What book have you been reading lately? Or will it help you sort of sit with your feeling and do some of that emotional work? Of course, there's still some empirical question around, will a human sit and do some of that work with an AI? Some of the data I've seen suggests that some folks will some of the time, but certainly all people won't all of the time. But that's also sort of true in clinical practice. Sometimes the person's ready to do that work, sometimes they're not. And the human clinicians are making decisions about how to hold that, how to lean into that, when to sort of push back and let that be enough for the session. And with ready access and immediate access to AI, what that model looks like is complicated, and I think is a completely unanswered right now. I mean, as clinicians, we sort of decided that once a week, maybe twice, 3 times a week is sort of the frame of the intervention. But with AI, should it be 3 hours on Monday and 4 more hours on Tuesday and 30 minutes on Wednesday? There's a lot around the frame itself about how AI should engage and how engaging it should be, even if we can solve the problem of making it engaging, which I'm sure many folks are working on. I know we certainly are.
Do you think
Yeah.
people are moving towards using AI instead of AI-based apps, like just going to the chatbots instead of going for the apps that are especially designed for this purpose to solve a particular problem?
Is the question, do I think that people will go to AI instead of, say, I don't know, Headspace or some other app that's been on the market for a while, or?
Yeah, like for a particular, because I understand that to keep a user engaged with a particular product, it has to really solve that kind of problem, and it has to be particularly focused to solve that particular case, right? So now with ChatGPT and other open source AI platforms, you can just easily go, they're web-based, you can just go type in, get a ready-made solution right there. So are people still going for apps that are specifically designed, or is that era over?
I mean, my quick answer, and I'd love to hear from others, is that I think we'll see how the market moves, but for the reasons that you already gave, I think everybody's going to have to deal with AI at some point. Like getting an immediate tailored response, at least the response feels immediate and tailored, whether it is or not is another question, but it certainly feels that way, I think is something that consumers often are looking for. So I think everybody's going to have to deal with that new dynamic that AI has introduced at some point.
I would.
Yeah, and I think.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Kay. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think this question, the previous question, and the question around, over validation, I think are very directly related. One of the things that I've been thinking about and talking about is just the expectation of accessibility, or people going to what is most accessible rather than necessarily what is most effective. I think this is where including clinicians as part of the decision-making process would be particularly useful. But there is a concern of people just jumping on what is most readily available. And, when we think about mechanisms of reinforcement, this is where we know some of the things that don't work, because, things like over-validation or sycophantism, is that how you say? I always get that word wrong. Yeah, that's some of the mechanisms by which, more widely available products are able to keep folks on the platform and simultaneously can cause a lot of harm, specifically within the mental health space, And so how do we develop mechanisms of folks engaging in this by making it more readily available, or providing psychoeducation about things that maybe aren't just ChatGPT is available for this, while making sure that patients also don't necessarily interpret, this mechanism of keeping them on the platform as, reinforcing their beliefs or, perhaps even making things worse. There's a whole side conversation that I can have about psychosis and sycophantism and ChatGPT, but that's probably for a later question.
And I think data-wise, I haven't seen anything comparing, Pioneer or generic LLMs to, I don't more static mental health specific apps, but I have started to see data on if the percent of the US population that might be turning to generic LLMs for mental health support. So I think Betsy Stade did a nationally representative survey of people using generic LLMs for mental health support, and it was something like a quarter of the sample that was nationally representative. And then I've seen something as high as 49 or 50% of the population, and folks are turning to ChatGPT for things like anxiety and depression and mood improvement and practicing communication skills and loneliness. And that might be making it kind of quote unquote, making ChatGPT quote unquote, potentially the largest informal mental health support channel in the US. So that raises some concerns like Kate was talking about around sycophancy and modeling harmful behaviors like narcissism and this kind of prescriptive attitude that it takes that's kind of non-collaborative, non-Socratic, doesn't necessarily lead to user-generated insights, and may not have kind of hyper-localized crisis resources that actively encourage utilization or that are easy to read.
Masum, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Hi. So every time we talk about Gen AI, I feel like the conversation quickly shifts to sort of conversational agents. But I was curious to hear your perspective on using Gen AI for unobtrusive and real-time prediction, and hence prevention and early intervention. So for example, using EMA or analyzing social media data using Gen AI. I was just kind of curious to hear your thoughts on that and also the corresponding ethical considerations.
Good question, Masum. I mean, I admit I won't say a lot here because largely what we're focused on are conversational agents. But the prediction problem, I think, is an interesting one. It's not unrelated to what conversational agents would do. I mean, the idea is that if a conversational agent is trying to arrive at something that would be helpful for you, there's a de facto prediction problem in there already, right? How am I going to know that if I suggest we talk about X, Y, or Z and not talk about anything else, how will I know that that's actually good for you? There's already kind of a prediction problem built in there. And I'm convinced that when it comes to making conversational agents more effective, a variety of reinforcement learning mechanisms will be essential. In the classic AI sense of how do you predict what's the best move in a chess match to get a good outcome. The architectures are very similar in thinking about what's the next best conversation to get a good outcome for this user. And so a lot of that work is certainly unfolding. But I think, though, as we alluded to before, this does raise the specter a little bit, though, of if I can build a really good model that predicts who you are and what you want and how to manipulate you, then that could also be a problem. Now, again, not worried about the systems that Ash and Kay and others are working on. It's once those systems are acquired by somebody else. In fact, I won't say who I was having a conversation with, but we were speaking to an individual that has originated a therapy in the last 40 years or so. And that was this person's primary concern. is that we would build these very predictive generative AI models. They would then be bought up by a pharmaceutical company, and then either shelved or used to sell what they felt were, less than effective, certainly less than humanistic kinds of interventions. So in a way, it brings me back again to this: what kinds of corporate structures and legal structures can we put in place that treat the data in a very extra protected sort of way, to where even after acquisition, the data still has some restrictions on how it can be used. The other thing I'll say, just as a quick philosophical aside, is that I admit, I don't know if it's my own reading or what, that predicting human behavior, especially at long time scales, is profoundly difficult. And so my hope is that there is no world in which humans can be perfectly manipulated and predicted. But I don't know, maybe we'll have to have coffee and talk that through.
Yeah. And this is where I'll jump in with one of my favorite points that I probably bring up in every single session that I speak at, which is, the immense importance of having clinicians, mental health clinicians involved in this work and in guiding this work. When you talk about prediction, I always think about risk. My mind always goes back to, the 2019 article on Facebook's black box suicide algorithm, and the consequences that we ended up having from that. There was unknown what was going in, but what was coming out was, the police being called to people's houses because they were flagged as being a suicide risk. And so that's kind of an extreme version. But that being said, not everybody has a mechanism to then do something about it. If there's risk identified and that's routed to the clinician as opposed to, something else, I think that there's much more of a safety. But I also, kind of similarly to what Derrick said, think about the corporate structure and think about the motivations that they have, because in that particular case, I imagine it was, trying to avoid litigiousness rather than necessarily providing care to the person.
I think we have time for one more question. So Timon, if you want to go ahead.
Here I am. Thank you all for being here. I had a short question on safety and quality standards, and I was wondering whether there is a commonly agreed upon list of safety and quality standards for generative AI in mental health, and are those the READY and FATA frameworks that you mentioned earlier?
I'll jump in and say, I wish there could be an overarching, agreed upon, what would you say, checklist of safety and quality standards. I think what I was seeing about, I don't know, a year or two ago was kind of no lists or checklists, and now I'm seeing more of a proliferation in academia, in organizations like CHAI and the Foundation for AI Health, and other organizations like the APA. I think now it's more of a question of how do we integrate and synthesize these various lists or frameworks or evaluative criteria, because what I'm starting to hear on the ground is folks are now feeling kind of overwhelmed and confused, consumers and clinicians and researchers. So my dream would be to get representatives from each of these organizations to create kind of an ever-evolving, ongoing kind of multi-representative meta framework. But yeah, as far as I know. Oh, go ahead, Kay.
Oh, no, I was going to say, well, I think that we're quite saturated, positively
Yeah.
so in a certain way, but also maybe confusingly so with frameworks. I think while companies may be aware of the frameworks, may be working off some of the frameworks, the place that I've constantly been fascinated about health tech is how little the majority of companies interface with policy directly, right? And are keeping very, very closely up to date with policy. And right, in lieu of maybe federal regulation at this current moment, one of the places that I think about, and I've been doing very intensive reviews specifically at the state level of what states are starting to enact, right? Because it's one thing to have a standard, it's another thing to have regulation and law and ways that these companies will be affected, especially on the pocketbook side, which I'd like to think is the main incentive for a lot of folks. And at that level, there are kind of different levels of protections that are starting to come into play, right? The problem is, right, again, one of the things that's coming out is it is so fractured by state, by topic, by legislative body, but there is starting to amass this, just kind of this groundswell at the state level of creating these. And the way that I like to think about it is the first, the first category is just development, how these technologies can and cannot be developed or should be developed. So that's one of them. In lieu of that, one of the first places that this started coming out is around consumer data privacy protections, right? So it wasn't patient specific, but it was from consumer bureaus, et cetera, or anybody who oversees consumer data specifically. And then it's at the healthcare level, what decision-making can and can't be used. And then specifically at the mental health level, which is quite a minute, side of it right now, but is increasingly growing. And so looking at these places, I'm particularly enthusiastic about companies starting to have to lean into some of these protections. And so I would just keep an eye out. And there's some really good resources that I can drop in to keep up to date for that. I'll do it in the chat.
Right. We are 2 minutes over time. So I guess we'll have to stop it now. But thanks to all the panelists for answering the questions, and to the audience members for asking questions and for patiently listening. So we have the next session at 4. So I'll stop this session now.